coming up on Rhetorically Defective.
So I want to talk about 2020 because you said over and over again that you were robbed in 2020.
Yeah, totally.
Now let me show you what they think democracy is. With the help of a Zoom call with federal employees on October 28th, 2020, seditiously conspiring about all scenarios about a Trump re-election.
Let's say there's a narrow Trump victory. We might have to pivot, and at that point we might need to say, we need to target the Democrats and make sure Biden does not concede. Or maybe it's a narrow Biden victory and Trump is not conceding. Maybe it's targeting Republicans and telling them it's time to get him to go.
And the only reason why they got away with this lie was because they continually labeled you as this horrible threat to democracy and Hitler.
Yeah.
They kept saying you're going to be a dictator, ignoring the fact that you weren't a dictator for the 4 years where you were actually the president.
So we're talking about what would it take to surround the White House and have people do stuff. We can divide it up easily with affinity groups.
But what's cool about this is that these people hosted the Zoom call with federal employees. Isn't that cool?
And thanks for all the facilitators from Democracy Kitchen, Feds for Democracy, and Shutdown DC for hosting our big Zoom call as well.
Yeah, I just recommend everyone who works in the federal government, text them, leak everything you can, save your emails, I record these meetings, I send it over.
Not sycophants, sycophants. It's Donald Trump's sycophants, not Donald Trump sycophants.
And Donald Trump sycophants.
I want to talk about 2020 because you said over and over again that you were robbed in 2020.
Yeah, totally.
How do you think you were robbed? Everybody always cuts you off. I'm going to allow...
Well, they not only cut you off. Well, what I'd rather do is we'll do it another time, and I would bring in papers that you would not believe. So many different papers.
There's the Russia hoax. There's the collusion with Russia that was never proven, right? That's one.
Well, no, it's proven it didn't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
But they talked about it on television.
But it took 2.5 years to prove.
But not only that, but it was a constant narrative on television. So
Sure.
that's a constant narrative that gets into people's minds, especially low information people that just watch the news, that you're in collusion with Russia. So that's one.
Sure.
So that changes the narrative. And then you have the 51 former intelligence agents that work with the original Twitter and get them to remove links. You can't share it on DMs. You cannot share that story. They swept that story because they said it was Russian disinformation, even though they knew it was not.
100%.
So that's two examples that are real examples. Now, anyone who considers himself a legitimate, objective observer of American politics, if you really want the best person to win, you would want people to not lie. And the only reason why they got away with this lie was because they continually labeled you as this horrible threat to democracy and Hitler.
Yeah.
They kept saying you're going to be a dictator, ignoring the fact that you weren't a dictator for the 4 years where you were actually the president.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
So, I keep hearing there's a threat to our democracy, whatever that means during this election cycle. 4 short years ago, during COVID that led up to the 2020 election, a global pandemic and racism seemed to be on the ballot. 4 horrific years later, now democracy, whatever that means, is on the ballot. Which is strange because Trump was already president and everyone still got to vote. But this time is different. Trump tried to steal the election. Now our democracy is at stake. Well, I'm here to tell you what you think democracy is, and what they mean by democracy are 2 starkly different concepts. From the people that brought you, a woman is whatever she says she is, and the classic, racism is actually privilege plus power equals racism, so black people can't be racist against white people, bring you, just in time for the holidays, a tale of democracy, whatever that is, in which only the Democrats can fight for democracy. And the opponents of democracy are always not the Democrats. First, we'll explore the historic flaws and failures of our voting machines that aren't even always made in the USA, because that's what you think democracy is, voting. Then we'll peel the curtain back and see what they really mean by democracy, which is federal employees seditiously conspiring how to navigate the 2020 elections in case Trump won. We'll begin by unearthing a video by PBS days before the 2020 election, made to sow seeds of doubt in our voting machines, just in case Trump won. Strap on your helmets, things are about to get pretty tarded. Now, without further ado, democracy.
Hello, I'm Miles O'Brien, the science correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. We're just days away from a historic presidential election that will test the various ways that we vote in this country with stakes that really cannot get any higher. For the past 5 months, my team and I have crisscrossed the nation. We've been speaking with secretaries of state, election directors, computer scientists, election security experts. Our aim was to better understand the technologies and techniques that we use to vote and see if they are, in fact, up to the challenge. For 18 years, the state used electronic voting machines made by Diebold election systems. The machines were widely used across the nation, even though experts proved they were easy for hackers to attack without leaving a trace.
A federal judge is ordering Georgia to stop using its outdated voting machines and...
In August of 2019, a federal judge ordered the state to scrap the flawed machines for something more secure and verifiable.
Hey, remember in August of 2019 when a federal judge decided the voting machines in Georgia were so easy to hack that they made them scrap the machines for more secure ones? Me neither. Prudent information for a strong democracy, wouldn't you say, fellow voting citizen? So we're about to hear from Brad Raffensperger, the person that Trump called to try to quote-unquote overturn the election. You're about to hear him speak 3 months before January 6th about how he has a really good feeling about these new voting machines.
Brad Raffensperger is Georgia's Secretary of State.
When you have a paper ballot, no matter how that really comes about, at the end of the day, you have the paper that you can do the audit from. And then you can audit the elections. That's something I think is more secure, because then we really capture voter intent.
But election security experts say that is not the case.
Alright, maybe Trump was, maybe he was onto something. This guy is going against the advice of the experts. Possibly not the most trustworthy fellow.
It's a computer, and you have no idea what's in the computer, and you have no idea what the computer is doing with the information that you give it.
Rich DeMillo is a professor of computer science at the Georgia Institute of Technology. He tried to stop Georgia from buying the Dominion system, now used in 24 states.
Allow me to add some context for you. According to NPR, Judge says Georgia must scrap outdated electronic voting machines after 2019. A federal judge has denied a request to move all of Georgia's elections away from unsecure, unreliable, and grossly outdated technology and toward hand-marked paper ballots that are optically scanned and counted. The order from the U.S. District Court judge also requires the state to cease using its direct recording electronic voting machines after 2019 and expresses doubts about the state's ability to roll out its new ballot marking device system in time for the March 24th, 2020 presidential primary election. So the judge wanted to get rid of the machines and go to hand-marked paper ballots. But Brad Raffensperger thought to himself, let's make us both happy. What if I could make a little bit of money and you could still get your little piece of paper? On July 29th, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger announced Dominion Voting Systems would be the state's new elections vendor, winning a $107 million contract to provide new touchscreen machines that print out a paper ballot with a summary of the voter's selection plus a QR code that is scanned and stored. So it's all of the same problems and security risks of an electronic voting machine, but now it prints you a receipt of the thing that you still can't check.
A ballot marking device is, in the first place, an extremely expensive pencil that will make mistakes, that is prone to failure, that is prone to misuse. And if it fails, if it's misused, you have no way of telling. If you use a ballot marking device, you don't have the original record of voter intent.
Are you concerned the system can be hacked?
No, we never take anything for granted. We are very vigilant. We understand that elections are tempting targets for hackers.
Indeed. At the hacker convention DEF CON, they have been making virtual mincemeat of electronic voting machines for years.
But bipartisan teams labored to determine voter intent as best they could. The tea leaf reading occurred in Shelby County's election warehouse, where they store the voting machines they use in polling places. Here in Shelby County, they use vintage 2000 devices made by Diebold Election Systems, a company no longer in business. These so-called direct recording electronic machines, or DREs, are paperless, making it impossible to verify their accuracy. They and the networked machines that compile and tabulate the votes are an easy mark for hackers, which they have publicly proven time and again.
Is it just me, or does it seem like it's really easy to hack these machines, and this guy gets a $107 million contract and he's like, don't worry about it, okay? How long have we been told to not worry about it for? Maybe these machines are easy to hack. I mean, I'm pretty sure even since their inception, they've been easy to hack, and politicians have been telling us to not worry about it. But the whole reason why Brad Raffensperger is in this mess is because his state used Diebold voting machines for 18 years. And security experts were saying that it's not secure, it's unreliable, it's faulty. They didn't learn that recently. That wasn't a new thing that they learned. Let me show you from 2004, since its inception, how corrupt these elections have been with this voting machine for about 2 decades. The exact Diebold machines that were in Georgia, by the way. So what you're going to see is how Georgia has been using these flawed machines since 2000, since the late 90s? Let me help educate us with a documentary from 2004 about how these machines have never been reliable by G. Edward Griffin called Invisible Ballots.
For 18 years, the state used electronic voting machines made by Diebold Election Systems.
Well, you know, we don't know anything about these touchscreen machines. It's really frustrating. He went to try to look at one. I went, we weren't allowed to look at it. We weren't allowed to, find out how they work. And he said, you really need to get a hold of a technical manual.
What a gem.
Of course, they don't publish those on the websites of the voting machine companies. I went to ESNS. That was the big one I was really looking at the time. And it said info@essvote.com for more information. And I thought, oh, well, maybe the people who work there have essvote.com on their email. And so I put essvote.com in Google search engine.
In 2004.
And sure enough, I found about 40 people who work for ESNS, and I found all kinds of information about them, where they like to go for vacations and where they went to high school and what they do. And one of them was afraid she was about to lose her job, and I thought, wow, if I was going to go mess with a programmer, I would know how to get them now. And then I thought, I'll go get Diebold now. And I found that they had been called Global Election Systems. They had purchased it quite recently, actually. And so the Global Election Systems email was called gesn.com, and I put that into Google search, and it took me to a page. It was an old Global Election Systems web page, and I thought, well, let me just take a look through this and see what I can find. And there was one little button that said FTP, and I didn't quite know what that would take me to.
These are the touchscreen machines made by Diebold, plus the software required to tally, collect and tally the votes in an election. Completely out in the open, on the net, publicly available. And it appeared to me to be a site for tech support technicians and things like this to upload and download latest revisions of the files, patches. If they were having problems in the field, they could take a file and upload it for the programmers back home to look at. This is not unusual. These type of sites can be found all over the place. What was unusual was there was absolutely no security on it. There was not even a single, quote, no trespassing sign. Pretty much the blueprints to the vault. Everything that you would need to know if you were going to look to hack one of these machines. Everything was there. Certification specifications, technical manuals, equipment specifications, actual source code, along with comments, from the programmers that we were finding in there, where they were talking about
democracy.
Well, this kind of procedure hasn't worked, and well, we'll change this and hope it works. Or we keep coming up with this error and we don't know why we come up with this error. This is not the kind of stuff that you want to be reading when you're looking at coding for something as sensitive as a federal election.
I got a call from Professor David Dill from Stanford, and he called and asked me if I had heard that the code for the Diebold voting machine was available on the internet. And he explained to me that this was one of the primary vendors of electronic touchscreen voting machines, and that companies typically are very proprietary about the code and it's not public, so no one's ever had a chance to see what's going on inside these machines. He asked me if I was interested in doing a security analysis of the code in this machine. A couple of hours later, after we hung up the phone, Adam Stubblefield came running into my office saying that he couldn't believe how bad the code was, and there were all kinds of security problems. He just noticed it right away.
The fact that they were using a database program called Microsoft Access, which is a great consumer product, but has absolutely no business being used for any kind of sensitive database applications such as our vote. It's a database that can be easily manipulated. All you need is a copy of Microsoft Access. You can open up and change any of the results.
By the end of 2 weeks, we had finished a 24-page report which outlined all kinds of security vulnerabilities. And the day before we were going to go public with the report, I went to the Diebold site just to see some things, and I really didn't know that much about Diebold. And at the top of the web page was a headline saying, the state of Maryland announces a $55.6 million purchase of 11,000 Diebold voting machines. And this was the day before we were going to release a report saying that those machines are totally insecure. So the New York Times the next day ran a story. The Washington Post the next day ran a front page story on it, as did the Baltimore Sun.
The significant thing about the Johns Hopkins report was that it forced Diebold to finally have to respond to the criticisms of its system. Up until then, Diebold was able to dismiss criticism as the work of crackpots or the opinions of hysterics. But here was a group of very skilled and serious academics who very systematically went through the software to discover things that were wrong with it.
Diebold came at me pretty hard. The people who had certified the Diebold voting machines tried to get me fired and came after me and never contacted me directly, but contacted the university's president and the head of our institute here and tried to create a lot of friction for me unsuccessfully.
Whew. Thank God we got rid of those unreliable Diebold machines. That company seemed sketchy anyway. Now, although Brad Raffensperger did not take the judge's discretion into account and make it paper-marked ballots, these new Dominion machines surely work way better. So let's check back in after those awful Diebold machines were replaced and see how the Dominion machines are going in 2020.
The experts all agree paper ballots marked by hand are the most secure, most verifiable way of voting. More than 1 million Georgia voters chose to do this at home this election. For those who didn't receive their ballots or chose to vote in person, the expensive, complicated, vulnerable machines created a huge bottleneck at polling sites, and there were many fewer of them. In Fulton County, 34 sites opted out because of COVID-19 concerns. With Democrats turning out 4-1 over Republicans, it was a recipe for scenes like this. Long lines of African American voters.
Oh yeah, dude. It's totally because they're black. It wasn't because the machines are prone to failure, spearheaded by a shadowy foreign company that keeps the code proprietary. It wasn't because beleaguered poll workers struggled with a new complex voting system that they hadn't even seen before the election.
Inside, beleaguered poll workers struggled with a new, complex voting system that they hadn't even seen before the election. In-person training was deemed unsafe in the midst of a pandemic.
I love that as the mostly peaceful fires roared across our dilapidating country. During a pandemic lockdown, they deemed it too dangerous to train these people on the brand new Dominion machines. Democracy.
Among other things, the passwords to log onto the machines, in plain view on the tables, didn't work.
Nah, it's totally because they're black. Let's listen to a black guy talk about how it's because they're black. I'm sure out of all the intelligent black people they found there, they found a nice, articulate black person to describe the frustrations he has with the voting process.
Corey Campbell waited 4 hours in South Fulton County.
I feel like they're just trying to discourage people of color or of minority to not vote, because that's the agenda that we're trying to push.
Discourage people of color and minority from voting because that's the agenda that we're trying to push.
I feel like they're just trying to discourage people of color or of minority to not vote, because that's the agenda that we're trying to push.
It's like they said to him, this is the agenda we're trying to push. Then they told him what the agenda was, but he wasn't really listening. And he's like, so this is the agenda we're trying to push? Well, I don't think that's the representation they're looking for with a black voice, but let's hear what else he has to say.
To especially younger people of color and minority. So, and it's very important. They know how important it is, so they'll do anything to throw a rock in the process.
Throw a rock in the process? Throw a wrench in the works, but I understand what you're saying. All right, let's stop fooling around and get back to business.
Software and hardware ages in dog years mixed with jet fuel, right?
Yeah, good point. Why is Brad Raffensperger still acting like an electronic voting machine is more reliable than pen and paper when that's the exact opposite opinion of all the experts in the field?
This is a pretty complicated way to do something you could do with pen and paper. There are advantages here, right?
Yes. The advantages are puts a true mark on the screen.
When done, the voter prints a ballot. Selections are recorded in human-readable text and in a QR code, which is read and counted by an optical scanner.
Democracy.
Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, says this is more accurate than pen and paper.
The problem with pen and paper is sometimes you have your instructions on what you're supposed to do, but you end up with spoiled ballots. Sometimes people will put an X here, but then they'll circle this one here, or...
A question mark? Should we really just let anyone vote if some of them just write a question mark? Is that valuable in a democracy? What's the question? Should our criminal justice system end the discriminatory cash bail system that allows the wealthy to buy their way out of jail while disadvantaging lower income Georgians? That's one of the questions. It's totally unbiased. It's nonpartisan. They're just objectively asking you a question that's not emotionally loaded at all whatsoever. You clearly don't feel like the question's supposed to be answered a certain way. You know, like when they say, allows the wealthy to buy their way out of jail while disadvantaging lower income Georgians. You would say no to that question just to mess with them because you know what they mean. No, I want the wealthy to disadvantage the poor.
Or they'll make different marks on it. What did they really mean there?
Still, elections officials tell us they seldom see a hand-marked ballot where they can't determine voter intent. In 2019, Georgia bought the devices from a Canadian company called Dominion Voting Systems.
Clearly, Dominion doesn't have the same vulnerabilities of its predecessor, and after 20 years of easy-to-hack voting machines, restores faith in our democracy. I mean, 3 years later, they sued Fox News for defamation. Even though experts have relentlessly fought against getting these Dominion voting machines, I think the government knows what's best for us.
Fox and Dominion have reached an historic settlement.
Fox News agreed to pay Dominion Voting Systems a staggering $787.5 million, just under half of the damages claimed in the lawsuit. Dominion accused the network of spreading lies about its voting machines, citing 20 statements alleging massive fraud made in the weeks and months following the election.
The Dominion machine that's as filled with holes as Swiss cheese.
Pressure on Fox was building as documents in the case had already brought revelations about some of the network's biggest stars and their private opinions.
You're not even allowed to have private opinions about scrutinizing this obviously sketchy software in these voting machines. You can't have private opinions about this process. How is that involved in a defamation suit? How does this not just feel a little corrupt, maybe, possibly?
For example, the documents show that anchor Tucker Carlson had texted his producer in November of 2020, the software expletive is absurd.
Oh, no!
One of his broadcasts from 3 months later was part of the case.
I dare Dominion to sue me because then it would get out faster. So this is... You know, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to say. They just.
On Tuesday, Fox acknowledged the recent court ruling that certain statements it broadcast about Dominion were false. It did not admit to actual malice, spreading lies knowingly or with reckless disregard for the truth.
So it sounds like Fox News knew there was something off. But since Dominion has learned to not leak their files onto the internet, and to keep their software proprietary, Fox News didn't know how to prove it. It just seems weird that ever since the invention of these electronic voting machines, they have always been easy to hack and have a low democracy rate of malfunctioning. It's like people that are obsessed with the word democracy should have a high level of scrutiny about these voting machines, especially since 2 months after Dominion settled their lawsuit, it was revealed that their machines are incredibly easy to hack and switch votes, though it just can't be proven that anyone has committed such fraud.
You couldn't say that the election was hacked or that people switched votes in the vote. You couldn't say that about the election. You couldn't say that. If you questioned the integrity of the 2020 election, the establishment would shut you down, certainly on YouTube. You weren't allowed to ever... They did that even to The Hill, which is a billionaire-owned corporate news channel on YouTube. They just showed a clip of Trump denying the results of the 2020 election, and they shut them down for a week. They wouldn't let them post a video. Right. Well, now that we find out that in Georgia, you can... Turns out they are vulnerable to hacking. Expert report fuels election doubts as Georgia waits to update its voting software. Wait, a newly unsealed expert? There it is, a newly unsealed expert. What the hell does that mean? A newly unsealed expert report arguing that Georgia's Dominion voting machines are vulnerable to hacking is fueling election doubts in Georgia. What? I thought you couldn't say this stuff. But it's in NBC News. A newly unsealed expert report arguing that Georgia's Dominion... Wasn't that what Fox News got in trouble for? They said that Dominion's voting machines got hacked? So it turns out it's not a crazy theory? It said that Dominion voting systems machines are vulnerable to vote switching and hacking. It's raising alarms in Georgia. It's raising alarms? Really? Other report paid for by Dominion argued the identified vulnerabilities were practically unlikely. I don't even know what does practically unlikely mean? That's not even you can't put those two words together.
In a report.
It's practically unlikely. What? So the report by Dominion about themselves found that there's nothing to worry about at Dominion.
Oh, go figure.
But this is just the voting aspect of democracy. What about their bullshit manifestation of democracy? What do they mean by democracy? They definitely don't care about voting integrity. Think of what you think a woman is. Now think of what they think a woman is. Now think of what you think democracy is. Now let me show you what they think democracy is. With the help of a Zoom call with federal employees on October 28th, 2020, seditiously conspiring about all scenarios about a Trump re-election. Here's a Zoom call titled Democracy Defense, a guide for federal workers, Wednesday, October 28th, 2020. Put together by Feds for Democracy and Democracy Kitchen.
Democracy. A lot going on right now, and as we're all aware, the election is now less than a week away. My name is Maddie Salzman. I'm a management and programs analyst in a federal agency and also a union member and former organizer.
I have worked in the U.S. government. I worked in the State Department for over 5 years.
As an attorney in the federal government, I am finding the chat suggestions very interesting, and I just do want to remind people that we lose our status as federal employees if we strike.
And I will pass it to Comrade Locke.
I'm Josh. It's nice to meet you all. I'm a federal employee for almost 5 years now.
Yeah.
I just recommend everyone who works in the federal government, if you read the mainstream press, like who is covering your agency, who is working for ProPublica, who is working for Politico. They all have Signal accounts. Text them, leak everything you can, save your emails, I record these meetings, I send it over. And I can't believe I'm showing my face here, but I've been doing this for months.
Okay, so it's a bunch of federal employees having a Zoom call about defending democracy in the workplace. What's wrong with that? Freedom of speech, right? It's not like they're colluding as to how they're going to unify and develop next steps in different scenarios of a Trump victory if he steals the election. Because it would be conspiratorial to plan on what you would do if your political opposition stole the election. So how would he steal the election exactly? How do they think Trump is going to steal the election?
I wanted to go over the objectives of this workshop with everyone. We have two main objectives: to explore options for defending democracy in the federal workplace in the event that Trump attempts to steal the election.
And then the second objective, very much linked to that one, is that you will leave the workshop with some next steps to prepare for different post-election scenarios and with actions and tactics that you feel comfortable employing in those scenarios.
Okay, so what do you mean by democracy? Let's see a few examples of what you're talking about when you say democracy. Kind of unclear. Democracy in the federal workplace? I can't wait to see their what is a woman version of what is democracy right now.
Helping to sort of define the situation we're in, activism of the role of federal employees as activists and as defenders of democracy.
Federal employees that are activists and defenders of democracy. I wonder if it's a bipartisan effort to defend democracy. It might lean in a certain political direction, but I wonder if there's anyone in the federal government that's on the political right that's also involved in this project of defending democracy.
So all of that being said, democracy needs defense. We must protect democracy because it's something that can easily go away if we do nothing to protect it. It's important to note that the Hatch Act applies to partisan activities and that protecting democracy is nonpartisan. We have freedom of expression and assembly, and these rights are not banned by the Hatch Act. We'll talk much more about this later.
Okay, so defending democracy, it's a nonpartisan issue. Oddly enough, there seems to be a monopoly on defending democracy politically, but all right.
I've spent the past 2 decades focused on what Representative John Lewis referred to as good trouble.
Oh, Representative John Lewis. Let's see who she emulates and who else emulates this great man.
My philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
Okay, so he's the kind of Democrat that can tell a screaming crowd cheering for him to get in trouble, but good trouble, necessary trouble. Okay.
If John Lewis as a 19, 20-year-old wasn't doing what he did, I would not be here.
And apparently he's a massive inspiration to AOC politically. Okay.
Notably how people can use nonviolent action or people power to advance rights, freedoms, and democracy.
I'm hearing nonviolent, get into good trouble, get into necessary trouble. Still missing the word vote right now. I wonder if they mean something aside from voting when they say democracy.
I have studied as an academic and as a researcher dynamics of authoritarianism, how authoritarians around the world have attempted to steal elections. And I've also focused on when and why movements for democracy have succeeded.
Interesting. This career Fed has happened to have studied authoritarianism globally and how to make democracy movements strong. I think we can both agree she thinks Trump is worse than an authoritarian. But what's an authoritarian? These are progressives. They never stop advancing democracy. Would she say that Democrats in power aren't being authoritarians? These tools are always fun until they use them on their own people.
At the same time, I have worked in the US government. I worked in the State Department for over 5 years, and I'm currently now on a leave of absence from my job to focus on our domestic democracy and peace building work.
As far as I know, democracy is a governmental thing. I just find it curious how she's like, well, I have to work on our domestic democracy. Oh, looks like she's working on international democracy as well, whatever that means. But when she's working on her domestic democracy, now she has to leave her position at the federal government temporarily. Just gonna take a leave of absence so she can work on democracy and remove herself from the federal government and possibly engage in associations with non-governmental organizations. I don't know, I'm just speculating. Speaking of NGOs or non-governmental organizations, would you find it peculiar if these feds work hand in hand with an NGO called Shut Down DC? Shutting down DC sounds pretty authoritarian, doesn't it? But this is democracy. If they democratically decide to shut down DC, then they're protecting democracy.
And I will say there's been a number of questions in this chat about whether or not there'll be another meeting or whether or not there's other things happening. We will at the end highlight some things. If you are in Washington, D.C., shutdowndc.org is the place to go for information and a calendar of further trainings and also activities.
My name's Rachel. As I mentioned, I'm not in an agency. I'm not a Fed. I work on renewable energy, and I'm pretty involved in coordinating some work with Shutdown DC and a couple of other ways to defend democracy after the election. Totally agreed. In the Shutdown DC conversations that I've been having, and that's not on the federal side, we also are often saying, like, call it a coup. It's a coup. Don't let anyone tell you it's not. Because the more you normalize that language, the more like it becomes apparent. And it's like most centrist folks in the government might start actually accepting that.
Yeah, and I think, I work on a project where I'm interacting on a daily basis with our politicals and starting to call into question if we're in the midst of a coup, should we even be listening to our politicals because they are not here legitimately anymore?
You see, democracy isn't waiting to find out a result of an objective process. Democracy is, a few months before January 6th, they're saying, call it a coup. Feds are saying, yeah, just start spreading coup around the office. Centrists will hear that and be persuaded. I wonder if they'll be persuaded to the right or to the left. So they're priming people to call it a coup. Feds are priming their coworkers to call it a coup. But the feds are just softly associated with Shutdown DC. Let's see what Shutdown DC is about.
Patrick Young is one of the main organizers for Shutdown DC, who participated in training sessions for the Sunrise Movement, where they, as the Wide Awakes, plan to protest outside Lindsey Graham's house.
Patrick Young is one of the main organizers for Shutdown DC, but he looks just like the guy that said this.
On the 6th, we're going to shut down larger parts of Washington, D.C. Congress is planning on coming to town and passing laws again and like having business as usual. And we're saying if we're in a coup, there's no time for business as usual. Members of Congress that are coming in, we're going to meet them at the airports or at Union Station and send them back to where they came from until we deal with the situation that we're in.
And he looks just like the guy that was in this highly organized, very specific call.
So let's say we want to shut down the White House and make sure nobody goes in and out. Right, we would need to have map the White House and know every access point so we knew we could blockade it. But then we would need more people to support that. So we might say Black Lives Matter Plaza and the African American Museum on the Mall Constitution are 2 public assembly sites, so we can quickly move large numbers into zones of potential conflict. So we're talking about what would it take to surround the White House and have people do stuff. We can divide it up easily with affinity groups.
So what does it take to get people convicted on seditious conspiracy charges? This is becoming confusing. We're defending democracy, sure, so I guess the people that were charged with seditious conspiracy were anti-democracy. And that's why the leader of the Proud Boys, because it's such a hierarchy and he commanded people to do things, the leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, got 22 years for seditious conspiracy. Let's see if they have a similar level of proof. Let's see how it looks when you're quote-unquote anti-democracy, about the level of proof that they need that you're conspiring.
A central figure in the attack on the U.S. Capitol has been handed the stiffest prison sentence so far. A judge ruled that Enrique Tarrio, one-time leader of the far-right Proud Boys, will spend 22 years behind bars. While not physically present during the January 6th riot, he directed others and celebrated afterward, saying in a text message, "Make no mistake, we did this." Tarrio and 3 other Proud Boys were convicted in May of seditious conspiracy. Prosecutors said their goal was to orchestrate violence to keep then-President Trump in office. On CNN, Tarrio ridiculed members of Congress who huddled in fear as rioters breached the building.
To Tarrio, January 6th was an act of revolution is what prosecutors wrote. They argued for a terrorism sentencing enhancement.
Well, prosecutors did say that Tarrio was doing this as an act of revolution. We never heard him say it and saw him say it. I mean, if he did say it, they should show it. He may have said it. Does that standard go both ways politically?
I heard someone in the chat talking about revolution time. And so I encourage, for all of us to be fighting for revolution before today, tomorrow, afterwards.
This is why it feels like we have a 2-tier justice system, which in the traditional sense of democracy doesn't feel democratic, but it seems like only the right can be anti-democratic And the left is always pro-democratic, no matter how much violence they cause, no matter how much disruption they enact. They are always pro-democracy, and the right is always anti-democracy. However, the country is democracy. Isn't that sneaky?
I think that this type of ruling sends shockwaves to other groups who are also alt-right, who are also people who are anti-democratic in nature, who are also people who are absolutely fine taking up arms against America when they feel as though their values and what they represent is leaving them steadily.
I love how the left gets the perpetual privilege of being the ones that are being oppressed, when people on the right weren't allowed to go to work or school, and people on the left were allowed to protest and have the media cover for them and call them fiery but mostly peaceful. When you're on the receiving end of that, you just feel like something is leaving you. It's not that it is. But with them, if you say the wrong pronoun, then that's an affront. Then that's an actual attack. However, burning down the country during a pandemic lockdown where they told us we shouldn't go outside or be indoors because we're going to spread COVID, COVID didn't spread when people were protesting. Well, that's an uncomfortable thought.
What we do know is that these individuals are now being held accountable for the exact crimes that they committed. And quite frankly, I think that that is proof positive that democracy works, that our justice system works. And at the end of the day, if you react in this way, if you try to destroy our democracy in this way, there are repercussions for that.
Not repercussions, you idiot.
There are repercussions for that.
Repercussions. You don't even know what you're saying. Sycophants. They're called sycophants, not sycophants.
January 6th, and Donald Trump sycophants.
Sycophants.
And Donald Trump sycophants.
Repercussions.
There are repercussions for that.
Not sycophants. Sycophants. It's Donald Trump's sycophants, not Donald Trump sycophants.
And Donald Trump sycophants.
Anyways, back to actual seditious conspiracy with NGOs that work in collusion with federal employees just before the presidential election in 2020, because Trump is such a threat to democracy that they had to have this level of planning and organization that was missing from the Proud Boys convictions that total into over a century in prison.
There's another website that we're looking at that maps critical infrastructure. So again, I think to myself, if we're in a coup situation and we're under attack and under fire, how do we, in the safest way possible, start chipping away at the systems and infrastructure they need to maintain power?
I don't recall the Proud Boys having such egregious levels of planning on how to completely destabilize all of DC. But she's cooking. Go ahead.
You know, some of the stuff that Shut Down DC is doing, some of the ways we're thinking about this that could be replicated in cities across the country. We've been working on a target map and a framework for scenario.
And we used software called ArcGIS. If you have a university affiliation or somebody in your group does, you can probably get this for free. Otherwise, you can get it for not very much. But what's cool about this
is that these people hosted the Zoom call with federal employees. Isn't that cool?
And thanks for all the facilitators from Democracy Kitchen, Feds for Democracy, and Shut Down DC for hosting our big Zoom call as well.
But what's cool about this is we're able to pull in other public data sets. So in the purple, we have all the military properties in DC. And then the nice folks from the District of Columbia city government have made available transportation infrastructure maps and all sorts of other things.
This map gives these organizations tools that could provide situational awareness, enabling users to make accurate, informed decisions based on current or planned activities, all accessible on their computers and phones.
So we began to put together a list of things we want to know about in the city. So where are all the police stations? Because it's good to know where the police are. Where are all the key government buildings? Where are all the media outlets? Who are the Trump boosters?
We may decide we need to talk with Trump boosters. So where are they? Lisa and some other folks came up with a great list of the folks that we, might want to go have conversations with. And, we have them in categories.
Let's say there's a narrow Trump victory. We might have to pivot. And at that point, we might need to say, we need to target the Democrats and make sure Biden does not concede. Or maybe it's a narrow Biden victory and Trump is not conceding. Maybe it's targeting Republicans and telling them it's time to get him to go, right? So we're thinking through the different scenarios and what might be the appropriate targets and then actions based on that so that people can start organizing and getting ahead of it. We're facing an administration and a potential coup and a potential insurrection where efforts to criminalize this are going to be even greater.
I love the idea that grandmothers were doing time in federal prison for trespassing on January 6th. Meanwhile, a few months before, these people are priming themselves to be like, we're going to be the victims. They're going to come down on us. That's how prepared they are.
Understanding that everything that we're doing now in this moment is laying the groundwork for what is going to come. Is there going to be a war? Are people going to get killed? Like, is that on anybody else's mind? I'm guessing it is.
When we zoom a little bit closer, we can take a look at, here's a version of it where in the, we're seeing live traffic here, and then where there are road closures. And then if we go even further in, we've got super high resolution. This is once again a courtesy of the District of Columbia, super high resolution, better than on Google Maps, aerial photography of Washington, D.C. We may decide that we want to go talk to the media. So where are they?
We might have to take over a TV station, right? Maybe we're taking over the local TV station and getting airtime to put out a call for people to come join us. I know that sounds crazy. I've always wanted to do it though. So we're talking about what would it take to surround the White House and have people do stuff. We can divide it up easily with affinity groups. So I want to encourage people to think about who's got the power in your community, map the power, map the opportunities, then look at it strategically and begin thinking about who you would want to engage based on the scenario that's happening. So for us, that might mean looking at blocking the bridges and main thoroughfares coming into the city to kind of shut the city down. Right now, a bunch of the folks that I work with, we're ordering gas masks. I know people that are buying Kevlar vests. Again, we didn't cause the war. We didn't ask for this war. Many of us are here because we want to fight it. We want something different. I have been in situations with live ammunition in more than one time. What are we willing to do? Right? Because again, we're not dealing with people with just simple guns. We're dealing with people with AR, AK-47s, multiple rounds, a lot of shootings. So, we are going to be in a crisis, but we want it to be one that we are creating. We want to make sure that we are on the offense and not the defense. We want them to be responding to us and us not responding to them.
Okay, a quick recap. Feds work with NGOs that take to the streets with detailed, interactive topographies of a location in order to create a crisis that they're in control of and cry about a police presence to draw sympathy for their cause. Rinse and repeat. Oh my god, I got so off track. We were talking about Patrick Young from Shutdown DC, in which the feds admit to working with this organization.
Patrick Young is one of the main organizers for Shutdown DC, who participated in training sessions for the Sunrise Movement, where they, as the Wide Awakes, plan to protest outside Lindsey Graham's house.
We are going to Senator Lindsey Graham's house at 6 a.m. We'll be there from 6 to 8 with Sunrise DC.
Good morning, Lindsey Graham!
Okay, so one aspect of democracy is going to a Republican senator's house and banging pots and pans at 6 a.m. I think I'm starting to understand the other definition of democracy right now. But Shutdown DC did that in conjunction with Sunrise DC, otherwise known as the Sunrise Movement. Well, what do we know about the Sunrise Movement?
The breakout of riots in Minneapolis, Minnesota was a powder keg long in the making. The evidence for pre-planning and setting up a situation for a disaster is overwhelming. What you are about to see is part of a 2-year undercover investigation into the leftist radicalization embedded within the climate justice movements, one in particular, the Sunrise Movement.
These escalations, these actions can be really, really dangerous.
Uprisings, including actions like burning buildings, are legitimate and powerful forms of resistance.
The woman supporting the nationwide arson during COVID is Sarah Abbott, the team support and cultural director at the Sunrise Movement. The Sunrise Movement's executive director is Varshini Prakash. How dystopian would it be if she was held in high regard by mainstream society? Well, she's been celebrated by Forbes, Rolling Stone, and Democracy Now! Curious, though, how her movement has no ties to supporting violence. But that's just the private sector. Those are just private media companies not understanding her background and ties to extremism within her movement. So what's the big deal? It's not like the White House considers her to be an environmental leader. Wait a tick. On whitehouse.gov, she's listed as an environmental leader. Democracy. Don't you feel like you trust democracy right now?
So last night, when that police station went up in flames, me and my girlfriend, we poured shots. We were happy.
This moment in history is a coin toss between freedom and fascism.
Oh my word, that is concerning. Should we tell some politicians about this and put it on their radar that they're federal employees are talking to these non-governmental organizations and colluding with them under the guise of protecting democracy to go out on the streets and harass people and destroy society and antagonize Republican politicians? I'm so glad I'm shedding light on this issue. Hopefully some changes can be made.
On June 1st, after days of riots, burning of businesses, many of which Black-owned, after killings and mob beatings on the street, AOC participated in a private Zoom conference with leadership from the Sunrise Movement, promoting more escalation.
You know, there are folks that are dismayed at the violence and at the destruction. When we talk about police abolition, and people say that this is a radical demand, you know what police abolition looks like? It looks like a white, affluent suburb. And when it comes to environmental justice, it's the same thing. And so I just thank each and every one of you for leading that systemic change, for ushering that systemic change.
Why did it take so long for the police to file charges and for the district attorney's office to move towards criminal prosecution? There was plenty of video evidence circulating on social media to justify immediate action by local law enforcement. Why? Is it because it allowed for more escalation and shift of blame towards the organizers' true goal, going after President Trump, his supporters, and the American justice system?
Whoa, hold on there, stereotypically blonde right-wing pundit. Just because feds have an interconnected network of NGOs and utilize their power as feds to advance their goals by circumventing actual democracy in order to defend democracy doesn't mean they're as dangerous as Trump. You see, Trump is a threat to our democracy. He must be dismantled by any means necessary. This is Satan Hitler Trump we're dealing with. Don't forget that he was president during the outbreak of COVID, where during a global pandemic lockdown, feds, not loyal to him or the country, had a plan to cause chaos to destabilize the country in order to advance their goals.
We have their plans, manuals, intercepted communications, and have recordings of their Zoom chats. The reason why the screens of these people in the Zoom are blurred is because they are minors. What we didn't expect to find were organizers radicalizing middle school and high school aged children, teaching them military tactics and preparation for high-risk actions. Some of these tactics include escalation provocation techniques, blocking freeway traffic, and how to get arrested, bogging down law enforcement in the name of destroying capitalism to make way for their Green New Deal.
Why be in school if we're not going to have a future?
Okay, so democracy also involves using your kids as political pawns to defend democracy. What's the alternative? Trump is elected as president, even though he was already elected as president? You wouldn't want that guy elected again. Remember what happened the last time he was elected? There was a global pandemic lockdown, and they were enacting violence on the streets and burning down buildings. You wouldn't want that to happen again, would you, if he was president? That's not nearly as terrifying as January 6th, which was, as we know, an attack on our democracy, where Trump organized his cultist followers to surround the Capitol building.
So we're talking about what would it take to surround the White House and have people do stuff. We can divide it up easily with affinity groups.
And then Trump imbued his followers with the power to not shut down the vote, but to delay the vote. Imagine if Trump colluded with feds for his followers to shut down Congress.
On the 6th, we're going to shut down larger parts of Washington, D.C. Congress is planning on coming to town and passing laws again and like having business as usual. And we're saying if we're in a coup, there's no time for business as usual.
Is there a scenario that might play out that would cause us to all go and shut down an airport?
Okay, these communists with their pie in the sky thinking, like, oh, we can just go shut down an airport. Well, how could you possibly do that? Do you have like the power to collude with the federal government and private sector to all decide to have the flu at the same time? You're acting like there's some sort of like Fed flu that they all act like they have in order to shut things down.
Right, in the note somebody said, Fed flu struck many TSA and air controllers threatening to shut down airports. That is a particular thing that we could all catch this winter.
Okay, so a bunch of feds act like they have the flu, working in conjunction with the private sector at airports in order to shut it down. Sure, but they're defending democracy. And nothing's an organization, it's just an idea. What they're doing is just an idea. There's not like this in the background coordination and like specific communication on message to accomplish these things. That's such a right-wing talking point.
But I also, in the most recent government shutdown, I think there was a really strong relationship between the air traffic controllers, even though they did not strike at any point, the issues that they posed to the unions in the airline industry that ended up playing a huge role in helping get the government back open. So I think having those partnerships with other organizations, powerful unions in the private sector that can have our backs and vice versa will be really important.
You see, democracy isn't only above. Democracy is also below. Think of it like a structure, like a coliseum, like there's pillars holding up a roof. There's maybe like 5 pillars underneath that each represent a different position in society that holds up this power structure. And so democracy is removing those pillars in order to defend democracy. Because are you really in a democracy if people have power over you? We're talking about people power. That's democracy. People power. People collectively organize and they decide their fate. Not the people they elect. That's not democracy, unless it's the people that we're voting for. But we have to go outside of that in order to defend democracy. We have to go to the homes of politicians and bang pots and pans on their front lawn and intimidate them and antagonize them. That's democracy. I don't know what you think democracy is.
So just to share a little bit, kind of one of the underlying theories of power that is kind of at the base of understanding civic action and why kind of people power has succeeded here and around the world. So the idea is that power ultimately flows from individuals and ordinary people, that no ruler or government can wield power without the consent and the cooperation of the ruled. So power is actually dispersed across society and concentrated in what we refer to as pillars of support. So these are organizations and institutions that provide a government or other power holder with the power with the skills, the knowledge, the labor, the know-how that they need to stay in power. And these pillars of support are made up of ordinary people like you and me who provide expertise, who provide specific forms of labor, who provide buying power. So if people in these pillars of support withhold or deny their consent and cooperation, meaning they stop obeying, they stop cooperating, and they engage in protests, boycotts, strikes, a whole host of other nonviolent tactics.
I'm not asking for the world. They know what I want. They know what I want. And if they don't, well, then I have to go into the street and we have to fight for what we rightfully deserve. These people today don't know what a strike is.
Right.
When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port, a lockdown. You know what's gonna happen? I'll tell you. First week, be all over the news every night, boom, boom. Second week, guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. They lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are. Now I have the president screaming at me, I'm putting a Taft-Hartley on you. Go ahead. Taft-Hartley means I have to go back to work for 90 days. That's a cooling off period. Do you think when I go back for 90 days, those men are gonna go to work on that pier? It's gonna cost the companies money to pay their salaries. Well, they went from 30 moves an hour maybe to 8. They're gonna be like this. Who's gonna win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody does.
Oh, who's that? Well, that's Harold Daggett, International President of the International Longshoremen's Association. You know, it seems like these unions seek to collectivize workers so they can utilize their people power to kind of chip away at the pillars of society that make it operate, you know? Now, what's tragic is that Harold received more than $855,000 in compensation last year for his leadership duties. His son Dennis was paid $785,000 last year. His other son John was paid $642,000. And his daughter Lisa made $210,000. Wow, she's not even making 75 cents on the dollar. What kind of leader do they have? You know, it should be very lucrative like that for you to halt all of society to make sure your men are paid more when that's what you're paid. They're pieces of shit every time.
That if masses of people engage in non-cooperation, no ruler can stay in power. And the other idea is that within these pillars of support, you can think of it as kind of a series of concentric rings. And, you know, at the center is kind of the power holder, and people who are, you know, in the rings around the power holder have varying degrees of loyalty to the center. So, you know, those who are maybe closer to the center, and this uses the example of, you know, the military, kind of starting with generals and going out colonels, foot soldiers, but you can think about this in terms of the bureaucracy as well, kind of going through the different hierarchy, that the people who are maybe closest to the center are more likely to obey, less likely to challenge authority. But as you go out to those outer rings, people are going to have less loyalty to the center, to the power holder. And these people are really key allies. And ultimately, you know, the goal in effective people power is to bring people over to your side, to get them to shift loyalties, to get them to move from the center to the outside. And as we know, and as Maddie, laid out so nicely, bureaucracy is a really powerful pillar. And, federal workers have unparalleled familiarity with the bureaucratic process. They know how to speed things up. They know how to slow them down. They have access to critical information about policies that are being considered and implemented. They can participate in internal decision-making. They can provide or deny knowledge and expertise that those at the top of the bureaucratic totem pole need, essentially.
That's all well and good. But is that nearly as damning as the 1776 returns document that helped the feds really understand the planning that the Proud Boys took behind their almost lethal attack on our democracy? Let's see what evidence they could conjure up to really malign the Proud Boys and make them the seditious conspiracists that they needed.
I hold in my hands 9 pages that were included in a legal filing in a case against the Proud Boy, the array of seditious conspiracists. The 7076 returns is what it is called, because this is a dangerous document that is outlining a conspiracy to overthrow the United States government. Plainly, flatly, zero hyperbole.
The document plainly says our request is simple, constitutional, and non-negotiable. We demand a free and fair election. The evidence of election fraud is overwhelming. We want a new election. Paper ballots only, no electronic voting, no mail-in ballots, no absentee ballots, in person with an ID or no vote, monitored by the National Guard. Now that would be the safest and most secure election we've ever had in history. Sounds a little different than taking over the government.
And we need to know who authored this document, who devised of this plan, this multi-pronged plan with maps.
Here's the map, you stupid piglet. 3 circles on it. Starkly different than an enhanced integrated topography.
So we began to put together a list of things we want to know about in the city. So where are all the police stations? Because it's good to know where the police are. Where are all the key government buildings?
Also, the Proud Boys didn't write it. They don't know who made this document. It was just sent to Tario. So they don't know who made it. Any Fed could have made this document and sent it to Tario just to have evidence to use against them. They were already planning in the background multiple different scenarios of what they would do. So this guy just gets sent a document and they go, look, he received the document. We don't know who wrote it, but look at the document. It's got a map with 3 circles on it.
This is CBS News. Before January 6, Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio was given plans to occupy congressional buildings and the Supreme Court. In the weeks leading up to the January 6 Capitol assault, Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio received a 9-page memo titled 1776 Returns that laid out detailed plans to occupy congressional offices to protest the counting of the Electoral College votes from the 2020 election results. He received them. They were given to him. By whom? That is the question we need to know. And it's really not gone into depth in the NBC article, although this is well written and they do a good job with.
Prosecutors have said that Tario did not forward the document to any other defendants, nor did he discuss the document or its contents with them. There's no proof that he even read it or distributed it to anybody. It was just sent to him. There's also a reference to storming the Winter Palace, which is a reference to the October Revolution. Why would they be referencing a socialist revolution in terms of taking over the government? So it's a document with a Google map with 3 circles on it, referencing a socialist revolution, and there's no proof that Tario read it or distributed it to anybody. And this is being used to vilify him.
This plan, this conspiracy, this attempt to overthrow the government was not created by Enrique Tarrio, but he was ready to put it into place.
Okay, so he's guilty of being ready to possibly prepare this document that there's no proof that he read to eventually, obviously, possibly, maybe, kind of enact the plan that he didn't discuss with anybody else. 22 years. Way more dangerous than the federal employees that are way more organized that are defending democracy. Isn't it incredible what you can get away with when you're defending democracy? So these are people that will totally circumvent the law, manufacture a crisis, and coerce unknowing people into shifting their loyalties to their cause. but miraculously have the utmost integrity when it comes to our easy-to-hack voting machines. I mean, you've seen them burn down buildings. Have you seen them ever burn down a voting machine? So let's try to tie this whole democracy thing together. When they externally advocate for democracy, it's a nebulous concept that they wield as a political pejorative. Only the political right is against democracy. The left is never against democracy, because what is a woman? Whoever says they're a woman. And what is democracy? Whatever they say is democracy. Their advocacy for democracy seems to have nothing to do with the integrity and security of our elections. They should all be screaming from the rooftops that we should only have hand-marked paper ballots. But internally, their concept of democracy takes a new form, as if they're howling at a full moon ready to transform into wolves that travel in large packs. What they mean by democracy is people power, where they destabilize and coerce polite society into acquiescing to their demands. Above, they have feds that are aiding and abetting violence on our streets. Below, they're strategically plotting all outcomes of the crisis they create, supported by the federal government. This manifestation of the incestuous relationship between the federal government and non-governmental organizations is not new. Click the video on screen for more information on that harrowing topic. There's two political parties in the United States: those who want to be left the fuck alone, and those who won't leave us the fuck alone. The issue is that those who want to be left alone often turn a blind eye to the bombardment of antagonization that they're on the receiving end of. Does cancer ever leave you alone? No. But if you find out you have cancer, we know what cancer is and how to eliminate it. You may have had cancer that goes into remission, but it comes back. So you may go to screenings to make sure you still don't have cancer, because it could easily resurface out of nowhere. Controlling your life every day with everything you do. A societal cancer must be handled in a similar way. We must study it to understand how it works and how to stop it from working. A societal cancer must have a societal chemotherapy. There are side effects to standing up to this societal cancer. You won't lose all of your hair, but you may lose all of your friends. It can be extremely isolating to go through this societal cancer alone. Society is made up of people. It's not a science. You don't need to be a scientist to cure a societal cancer. You just have to be part of society to be the chemotherapy. The cancer seems to be a matter of hypnosis, and it seems to spread unknowingly from person to person. Kind of like COVID, oddly enough. A cancer spreads throughout the body. A societal cancer spreads throughout society. You've probably encountered people in your life that have all of a sudden changed politically and they're very extreme in a certain direction. It feels kind of like hypnosis. So let's end this video with some wise words from Jerry Springer. Take care of yourself and each other.
You know, I'm not here to explain hypnotism. I can't. Maybe the wool's being pulled over my eyes, but I have seen it work when no other explanation seems forthcoming. Many of us continue to scratch our heads. I don't believe this hypnosis stuff we say, and yet there is a certain arrogance in that assumption, because it suggests that we mortal humans have figured out every dimension of reality, that we know all there is to know, that there is nothing beyond the 5 traditional senses of sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. But why do we believe that? Why can't there be levels of existence or communication beyond human comprehension, or levels which some people have a better knack of reaching than others? I don't feel as if I have hypnotic powers, but I'm not prepared to believe that because I don't have it, it doesn't exist. Till next time, take care of yourself and each other.